So, morning. You will have seen this week, if you are online, the big row that has taken place between India Willoughby, the broadcaster, and JK Rowling. India Willoughby ended up reporting JK Rowling to the police because JK Rowling referred to India as a he. So therefore, India Willoughby, bearing in mind, has gone through the transition surgery, is legally recognised via her passport as a woman, has said that this was a hate crime. So, interesting conversations that have taken place online since then, some rather toxic, it has to be said, but she's gone to the police. She said to the police that she wants this recorded as a hate crime. The police have said, well, actually, no. This is not a hate crime. This is a non-crime hate incident. And actually, you don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to hate crime. However, if you were a different protected characteristic, this is according to India Willoughby's timeline, by the way, so this is apparently what she was told by the police. If you had a different protected characteristic, then perhaps there would be the intent of a hate crime there, but this will just be recorded as a non-crime hate incident. So obviously there's a conversation to be had about whether even that is appropriate, whether there has been a crime committed, but also whether the kindness in this debate has been lost. Should misgendering be a crime? Personally, I don't think so, but I do think it's unkind to misgender someone. You may have a different view. Front page of today's Mirror, Brianna legacy starts in schools. This is Brianna Gay. It's Gee, isn't it, is the way in which I think you pronounce the surname. Murder has inspired her mum to go on a mission to make children kinder. So this is obviously a relevant story. Well, in the studio, as always, she's here. It is Dr. Renee Hoenderkamp. I know you will have a lot to say about this.
I have a lot to say about this. Good morning.
Morning. I'm getting looks already. I can feel she's looking through me. But before we debate all of this, and we debated with Zoe as well, we've got Zoe Chowney coming up as well, who is a broadcaster, to talk about this. We've kept you, Paul Britton, the criminal barrister, because I thought it would be interesting.
I've been hooked in.
You've been dragged back in. We don't let you go. Because I thought it would be interesting from a criminal barrister perspective to hear about the differences in the thresholds for what is constituting a hate crime, what constitutes a hate incident, and where misgendering falls from a legal perspective in all of that.
Well, transgendering is a protected characteristic. The law does recognise 5 protected characteristics. One of them is transgender identity, race, religion, sexual orientation, and disability would be the other recognisable ones. So India was probably right to have reported it to the police, and I don't know why the police haven't pursued it, because they are under the Crime and Disorder Act, which is what deals with these sort of offences. If it is a definition that if the victim perceives it as hostile, then it is an actionable offence. However, what is considered unfriendly or hostile is something that will need to be defined probably by the Crown Court. And we talked about earlier an employment law case, but the problem with the employment tribunal is that that law is not binding on the criminal courts.
Well, just to read what India Willoughby says about this, and by the way, we did invite India Willoughby onto this programme to talk about it, but we were...
She blocked you.
We were declined, and also we were told that she hoped talkTV closed. But it was a very polite email. Even though I'm covered by one of the protected characteristics, in brackets, gender reassignment, and I am legally recognised as a woman/female, to constitute a hate crime, you have to prove hate and a crime as 2 separate components for a comment made online. Whilst JK Rowling's tweet met the criteria for hate, it did not cross the threshold of a crime, i.e. vandalism to my property, physical assault, etc., meaning it didn't meet the full requirement for prosecution as a hate crime, but it did meet the threshold to be officially recorded by the police as a non-crime hate incident.
Hurty feelings.
Yeah, as which some people would object to that being on their record altogether. So
I don't think that's right.
Okay, interesting. Why?
I wonder if the police have just tried to dispose of it early on because they don't know what they're doing. It's what you have to do is show that you have to demonstrate there was some hostility, or secondly that it was motivated by some hostility in regard to one of those 5 protected characteristics recognised by law, and transgender identity is one of those.
But as I said to you outside, who defines what is hostile? What I feel as hostile. We're talking about feelings here. In this entire debate, we are always talking about feelings, and this is about hurty feelings.
Well, the CPS have a definition, which is the Crown Prosecution Service, and it's any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice. Now, India is saying that she perceived it to be hostile, so that would satisfy the CPS's test.
Hurty feelings.
However, that's very different to how the judges would define it.
And she also says later on in the thread, going on from here, UK law clearly needs to change because LGBT plus hate crime needs to be made as serious as offences which are race or religion related. So that implies from her tweet that there is a different threshold if something is said to you that is perceived to be hateful, if it's race or religion related, than if it is LGBT plus related.
And yet our streets are filled every weekend with people shouting offences which are offensive to the Jewish people in this country. But we're not seeing one non-crime hate incident being recorded for those, are we? Those hurty feelings don't count. So what India says is materially provable wrong. People of religion are not being treated with a lower threshold than she is.
But is there anything legally in what she's saying, or
there is?
Are they all equal?
India has a very good point, and it would be a very good case to bring. The police.
I think Renee has a good point as well, that it's not being implemented. But go on.
But what is so when we talk about transgender identity, is mispronouncing someone, is that the hate crime? Is that the offence? Because that is what JK has done.
Lots of people have.
She has used he and him instead of she and her. I don't know if it therefore follows, and this is why this sort of case needs to be a test case at some point to determine what we are going to perceive as hate crimes.
Could you make an offer to India to bring a test case against JK?
If India wants to fund a private prosecution, and absolutely the firm does that, so we could bring it, but I'm sure JK will defend it vigorously.
But that is interesting. So is it that there is a lower threshold for race or religion?
No,
or is it that it's just easier to prove race or religion?
Sometimes I think it's understanding. I mean, race has been around for a long time, religion has been around for a long time. Transgender identity is a very new concept.
Well, no, it isn't, is it? Because we've had we've had transvestites for centuries. We always have.
I think.
But when it changed to transgender, I think that's when it became different.
Yeah.
Because I think that you're right, it used to be a little bit more clearly defined. If you were a transvestite, you probably cross-dressed. If you were transsexual, you had gone through surgery, and those were the kinds of differences that were perceived.
But we've been talking about race and religion for 30, 40 years. Transgender, it's been, 10, 15 years? It's been, and I accept that there have been people that have identified like that in the past, but has the media been talking about it?
But
no.
also, I think it's important to point out that in the law, the protected characteristic of transgenderism actually states somebody who has embarked on gender reassignment. That's what it actually says.
That's right, yeah.
The majority of men who identify as women do not have gender reassignment.
Well, I think that's
why India has a certificate.
Yes, India has, but the majority don't.
But I think it's actually since that change that this debate has become so toxic.
We need to actually abolish the Gender Equality Act.
When it used to be, I love the little grenades you're throwing. I will pick up one of those grenades in a moment. But when it used to be much more, I suppose, medicalised, and when it used to be much more clearly defined, you have been through the surgery and now that is what you are, as opposed to this is how I feel, I would like a certificate to say that I feel like I'm a different...
Fancy having to get a certificate. I find that bit quite wrong and offensive. You know, it's like you and I having to get a certificate to say that we're gay. It's just, it's mad.
Yeah, it's not the same.
The issue is, though, that because of where there is the gay situation, which is different. By me or you being gay, there is no conflict of rights on anyone
Absolutely.
else. Whereas the difference with someone's
there is, because people can't use certain type of language with us that we find offensive or hostile. They can't swear at us and call us a faggot or whatever.
No, but that's no different to not being able to call a person of colour something offensive. It's still not inflicting on my right to be in a space with only other women.
But it impacts on the rights of employers. They can't discriminate against us because of our sexual orientation.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's perhaps a fair point, but it's a point about equality. Whereas I think the difference with the gender debate, when it used to be about transsexuality as opposed to transgender, is that you have. Well, there are 5 areas, I think, which I've spoken to you about off air, where I think that there are conflicts of rights. But one of them, the most probably prevalent one, is that it means that someone who has still the sexual organs of a man can enter a female safe space by the mere fact that they say that they are
that's very
of
different,
a different gender. Now, that's a different right being infringed on someone else than me or you being gay and living our lives and having the legal rights that anyone else would have. Say that again?
Because we'll still use the male toilets.
Yeah.
But I think it extends even further than there. And coming back to your point, when you are talking about something that has a material medical effect on somebody's body, so be that surgery or be it drugs or hormones, it's very, very different to words. It's very different because you're starting to go into territory where we are using other people, surgeons, the NHS, the whole system around that, to medically change someone's body to try and allow them to say they are something that they will never be biologically. And so it's a very different thing to just words.
Well, they'll never be under the microscope, but on the outwardly they can be. I think India makes very good. Well,
outwardly you can do that without any of these things.
Yeah,
but I mean that's where you and I differ, because I think that I think misgendering should be a hate crime, unless it's in probably quite extreme circumstances. No. Probably not. I mean, if you're doing it, if we're taking the threshold that India herself spoke about, if I'm coming up and assaulting you...
But it's Orwellian, isn't it? You will discard the truth.
Hang on, I haven't finished yet. If I come up and assault someone and then misgender them whilst I'm doing it, that is an aggravated crime.
But surely the crime is the assault. You don't assault anyone.
No, because it's about the motivation behind the crime.
Like planning would be, if you planned a murder, that's an aggravated feature.
An assault is a crime.
But then by that logic, I could say then that I would come and assault you, partly because you're a woman and because I want to assault you.
So what? You've assaulted me. There's the crime.
But it's aggravated because he's misogynistic and he hates women.
Because there's an extra element to that crime of my misogyny. That's how I say it.
Is not every crime by a man against a woman driven by misogyny?
Well, it depends, I think, on the intent.
Probably not.
Of course it is. A physical crime.
Women? Well,
so when a man rapes, assaults, punches, that's not driven by misogyny?
Yes, that is, absolutely. But if I defraud you, that's not necessarily driven by misogyny.
That's not an assault.
But if he says I'm robbing you,
assault was just the example. But not. Sorry, we're doing 2 against 1. But the.
Oh, I don't care.
You take 10 against 1.
I'll switch sides in a minute. So.
But anyway, I don't believe in general day-to-day life it should be a hate crime. But I do think it's incredibly unkind. Yes. And I think in the temperature of this debate, both sides, by the way, I don't just say that the gender critical side is being unkind. I think that many of the trans activists are also horrifically unkind. If actually you go back to some of the things India Willoughby has said about JK Rowling, they're absolutely repellent as well.
But then we raised the point this morning, and you gave me a very interesting answer, which I thought was actually, we raised the point that if we insist on everybody is kind, we get to the point where we stand in a court of law with a victim of a sexual crime, and she has to say she raped her with her penis.
And I think you've lost the right then for that kindness if you do something like that.
So but I think just mispronouncing someone, or that the other one is the dead naming when you use their previous name, on its own can't be capable of an offence, because what your intention needs to be hostile.
And that's difficult to
quite
prove as well.
often, I might come across men, for example, boys, he and him, and they're they and them, so they want to be a they and a them, but I might accidentally say he or him. I shouldn't automatically be committing an offence under the law, because my intention is
because you used correct grammar.
I've had 40 years of my life of men being he and him, and women being she and her, and it's a slip of the tongue. Of course, if I thought about it hard enough, I would say they and them.
Would you? I wouldn't.
I would for them.
Yeah, I don't believe you. I think you would.
I wouldn't use they or them.
Would you not?
It's a nonsense.
It's
a nonsense.
I thought that you
But
would.
even if someone says to you, can you just not say, what does it matter to you?
I can understand that.
What does it matter to you?
Well, it's grammatically a nonsense in the English language.
Okay.
It's
but the English language has changed.
No, people would like it to change.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. They or them. Do you know what? This non-binary business is a nonsense just in the words non-binary, because they're using the word binary.
Yeah,
so they're accepting there are two differences, but now suddenly they're nonsense.
By the way, I do think some of it has gone too far, and I do think, just to pick up on your point, if you do, I do it with Sam Smith all the time, and I try and remember to call them a them, but I never do, and then I sort of joke that everyone's non-binary. So I do think there's a lot of
See, I would make that mistake. You say Sam Smith, and I say, what's he doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that. I think if your intentions are good and you're a kind person, because I think some people from the activist community would like to see you prosecuted for that. I think that's nonsense.
Yeah.
But I think in a world of kindness, it's nice to try to remember to do that. I know you disagree, but I think it's nice to do that.
I don't disagree. And we're going to have Zoe on later, who
she's coming on now.
Always call as she, of course, and respect, because you know why? Because she's been respectful to me. I respect what she's done.
So then that goes back on what you just said. If I said to you I'd like to be they, or you try and remember, you'd say no.
I think Renee just doesn't want it shoved down her throat and made to feel like she's doing something wrong.
Which I agree with.
Yes, but I also think that we're moving into territory, they and them. Soon you're going to be saying to me that I must call someone a cat, because that's what they want.
No, I don't.
There has to be a line
no,
somewhere.
but it's a good point. It could be a slippery slope. It could be a slippery slope.
We've got to get to break.
Stop.
Paul,
it is, though, isn't it?
Thank you for explaining the legality around that. When we come back, we'll talk to Zoe Chowney.